please welcome Lynn. She's going to be chatting to Terry Canning, to Stephen Agnew, to Anne-Marie McGoldrick and Cara Hafney on climate tech. Can climate tech bridge the carbon chasm? Please make them feel welcome. A round of applause, please. Everybody's there.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that we're running into the lunchtime slot, so and I can't see who's out there at all because of the lights, but welcome everyone. I'm delighted to have you here. My name is Lynn Rainey. I'm a partner at PwC and I lead on Place and Purpose in addition to my day job of being a forensic partner. I'm delighted to have a panel here today to discuss can climate tech bridge the carbon chasm. Just as a bit of background, the UN Secretary General has been quoted as saying we're still careering towards climate catastrophe. The Northern Ireland Climate Change Bill has come into play. It commits us to net zero in Northern Ireland by 2050. But is it an ask too far? Is it achievable? Do we think it's actually realistic? And in the past, I suppose, the view would have been that 82% reduction probably seemed a bit more appropriate by 2050, and that was certainly, I think, what the initial view was, but it's now 100% by 2050. And as someone who recently purchased an electric vehicle, I've told the panel, if we run out of steam, I can discuss with you just how difficult it is to actually drive an electric vehicle effectively north and south of the border over the course of a day, because I think I learnt everything last Friday that I ever needed to know about the infrastructure around charging points, cables and accessibility in general. But the implication of this new 2050 target is that Northern Ireland must outperform all of the 5 net zero pathways that the Climate Change Committee advised in the 6th UK carbon budget. And it requires a major step up in policy and some rapid progress that needs to be made during the 2020s. And that's around areas like energy generation, surface transport, buildings, agriculture, land use, and so on. I am not an expert in this area. I'm just here to chair the panel, but I'm delighted to be joined by a group of people who are much better placed to discuss it than I am. So I'm going to ask them each in turn if they would introduce themselves, and then we will get stuck into the questions. So I'm going to start with you, Anne-Marie, if that's okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Anne-Marie McGoldrick. I am director and co-founder of the Electric Storage Company. And we are a data and services energy company, and we look to optimise the energy you use in your home through storage and renewables, and also in small commercial within Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland as well.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Terry.
Yeah, hi, my name is Terry Canning, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Catastrophe. We provide technology which monitors livestock, and we monitor that livestock for productivity and for wellness. And we have the tech which tells farmers what they need to do to animals to make sure that they're better cared for and so that they're also more productive. Our technology has been in the market for the past 12 months, primarily in GB and also the USA. We are a VC-backed company. We've raised about 5 million in the past 2 years, and we're really just growing the business here in Belfast and growing it out throughout the world.
Thanks, Terry. Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Agnew, head of Renewable NI. We're the voice of the renewable electricity industry in Northern Ireland, so our members would be engaged in wind, solar and storage developments, and it kind of ranges right across the kind of supply chain from sort of large and small scale developers on and offshore, as well as those in the supply chain.
Thanks, Stephen. And Cara.
Hi everyone, I'm Cara Hafney, deals partner at PwC, and have the pleasure of leading our Raise Ventures business within the UK, so looking at VC funding into digital and also in climate tech.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we have a number of questions we're going to run through as a panel, but equally everybody's willing to chip in. So I'm expecting this to be quite a lively debate because we've quite an interesting discussion beforehand. So I'm going to start with the first one. Net zero by 2050. How realistic is that target, or are we just kidding ourselves? Stephen.
Okay, I'll start off by saying I think it is realistic, but there's caveats to that. So as Renewable NI, we've just completed a pipeline survey of our members, and in the current pipeline, there's enough onshore and offshore renewables to treble our amount of renewable electricity. And that doesn't mean just then decarbonising the power sector. It also means if you electrify heat and transport, you can decarbonise those as well, because in terms of power, we're already at about 45% carbon reductions. But if you look at heat and transport, they're only really starting to turn the corner now. So, electrification of heat and transport has to go alongside the transition to renewables. We've set a target as an industry to be at zero carbon electricity by 2035, and we're encouraging the Department for Economy to match that ambition. The International Energy Agency has said all advanced economies must be at zero carbon electricity by 2035. So we think that's the least of our least that our ambition should be. But potentially we could do it even quicker. And as I say, we have the projects. I suppose the but that comes in is, but we are not getting projects through planning quick enough. It can take typically anything from 3 to 7 years to get a wind farm through planning in Northern Ireland. If those timelines don't change, we'll fail to meet our 2030 targets and our wider decarbonisation targets. So for our members, in terms of the investment, in terms of the projects, in terms of the land and all the different things that you need to build out renewables, it's all there, or feels like it's coming, with the exception of planning. If we don't start reducing our plan timelines, and as I say, start acting like we're in an emergency, because we talk about a climate emergency, but we don't deliver renewables or green infrastructure at an emergency pace. We've seen with COVID, government can act fast when required to do so. So if we can turn the corner in planning, then I do think, certainly from an energy perspective, the targets are achievable.
Yeah, and I know there's a big focus on electrification and reducing fossil fuels, but there are also implications across other parts of the sectors. If you think about construction in particular, I know, actually talking to somebody last week, they were trying to get a house passed, and everything that they're looking at now is around renewables. So there's a big uplift that needs to happen in that space as well, and then also thinking about what retrofit looks like. So where are we with any of those things?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a big change about the next phase. Almost the last 10 years where we've been, we're at nearly 50% renewable electricity, and people, that's happened without most people noticing. You switch your light on, same thing happens. But we're now moving to things like heat pumps, electric cars, as you've alluded to, and it's going to affect how people live and work, and that will be the challenge of this decade, bringing people with us, and I think there does have to be incentivisation from government. Both, I suppose, carrot and stick. So we see things like, the end of sales of petrol and diesel cars, but we do need support for people, for example, to put in heat pumps, which currently are more expensive than the fossil fuel equivalent. So we do need that impetus from government. And again, there's nothing definite in that regard, and we do need those signals from government.
I was just going to pick up then on your point on retrofit, because I actually think that's what's changed. Certainly what I'm saying is actually don't just destroy everything and then do it green. Actually, how do you look at retrofit? So what we're seeing in modular building and everything that I'm seeing in my market's really interesting and very different narrative than there might have been there 5 years ago, which is really
yeah. I'm conscious that agriculture always comes under a bit of a lens whenever we look at net zero and the proportion of methane gases produced in Northern Ireland in particular, because we're such an agriculture heavy location in many ways. I'm conscious, Terry, obviously you have developed a very advanced technology that is helping farmers address some of the challenges of net zero. So where are we seeing tech businesses rising to the challenge, and what kind of benefits do they actually deliver?
Yeah, so what we have done in Cattleye is develop tech that carefully monitors animals as they walk past a low-cost 2D security camera, and we pull that up into the cloud, and we run it through various neural networks that analyse how the cow is walking and then can derive certain things about the cow. For example, our first insight is if the cow has any sore feet. Now, if a cow has a sore feet, she's actually very unhappy, as you would imagine, but also she's producing less milk for the same greenhouse gas emissions, so she's very efficient. So what we do is we tell the farmer what they need to do, and there's a triple win there because the farmer makes more money, the cow is happier, but also the greenhouse gases are being reduced per litre of milk. And really that productivity is so important from a greenhouse gas emission perspective. There was some analysis done in 2016 where it deduced or concluded that the top 20% productivity dairy farmers were producing milk at a third less of the greenhouse gas emission intensity. So productivity is extremely important. And as I say, it's not just a win for the environment, it's a win for the farmer and also a win for the animals as well. So that's very much our perspective around livestock emissions.
And how accessible is the technology? How many farmers are signed up for it even locally? I know obviously you sell this technology outside of Northern Ireland, but when we think about how important agriculture is to Northern Ireland, what's the take-up been like?
Yeah, I must admit now we have focused probably more in GB in the US because of the size of the farms and the size of the market. But in terms of the barrier to entry of using the technology, it really just requires the farmer to invest in a small camera. It could cost £200, and the system then the artificial intelligence starts to learn the cows and learn what to look for, and then start to feed that back to the farmer. So as we're sort of an early stage startup, our focus has been initially larger markets, but we'd certainly hope, and we're working with Caffrey in Northern Ireland, the Greenmount campus. They have the first Northern Ireland installation of the technology in place, but we would hope that we could roll it out through other farmers in the region.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, my background, I very much come from like a dairy farming background. Most of my family are farmers, so I can only imagine if they think their yield is going to improve as a consequence of knowing how happy their cows are. That's a win-win for everybody, along with methane reduction.
Absolutely. But you find, farmers are really concerned about animal welfare. Like that's something that we see. It's quite interesting in GB. The retailers are like Tesco or Marks and Spencer's are very connected to the dairy, so they have direct contracts. And in that scenario, we have seen a greater demand from those retailers for the farmers to meet certain requirements, and that's been in place for a number of years. So that's another reason why we focused on that region. But certainly farmers are interested in welfare, and of course they're interested in making more money as well.
Brilliant. Okay, Anne-Marie, just turn into you as well. What's your view in terms of how tech business are actually helping with the net zero?
Yeah, I think we have implemented a piece of kit, basically, that brings back data from putting battery storage and renewables in any home. And that data allows us to optimise the energy use in the home, as it does in small businesses. Because what happens is, people put PV in the roof and say, that's great, we've got the sun's now coming into the house, it's generating some energy. But actually, are we optimising that to its best use? And what we do is, we look at that data, we pull back all of that data, we do the analysis of it, and we optimise it remotely. So you as a customer don't have to do anything. We'll look at that and say, actually, I'm better to store that piece of energy today, or should I actually sell it back to the grid, or actually should I use it in the home? And by doing those, then we are optimising the energy, which means for every unit of energy you're coming into your house, we're making best use of it. And that's really important for any household, but it's also important for small businesses where they're trying to reduce the amount of energy they're using, but at the same time they want to keep the electricity bill down. And with the present energy crisis of the price of a unit of energy going up so high, people are looking, well, actually, what is my unit of energy actually doing? So I think by using the data to educate us, and I think also customers have come around to this themselves. I mean, I think we've talked about education of people understanding renewables, but more and more people are really, really understanding it now because they're looking at their energy bills, their gas bills. What is my options to fuel? We talk about fuel poverty. Northern Ireland has very, very high fuel poverty. We do have a lot of choices in what we use when it comes to energy. Gas will disappear. I know we're looking at hydrogen. That's still a little way away yet. But I think that the data has been supporting that hugely, and we've used that, and we've done several projects, one in Coleraine where we have put battery storage and renewables on people's roof for a large number of houses, and we've been using that data to support bringing people's energy prices down, and we're achieving almost 60% reduction in their energy, which is, huge right now. If you tell somebody you can reduce their bill by 40%, that's great, but 60% is brilliant.
And just, I suppose, when you think about the types of technology that have been installed on domestic properties, what sort of conversations are you having with the people living in those homes, and how are they actually changing their behaviours? Because there is something funny that happens when you see the data coming through about, and I'll talk to my car in a minute, but it does change your behaviour. Well, I find it's changed my behaviour. Are they changing how they use electricity, or being more mindful of how they use power?
They're more aware of what they use, and I would say to change people's behaviour, it's a big ask. People won't just change their behaviour because you're asking them to. They have to see the benefit of that themselves. But what we're noticing is that people's awareness and understanding what renewable is, understanding how they can, because what we don't want to do is people to stop using energy. Electricity is a good thing. We want to help the grid bring more electricity when we want to electrify heat. We want to electrify, your car, really important. People want to be able to plug their car in at home and drive their 250 miles, hopefully, and not have to stop somewhere. So people, it's like we talk about it like when you have water in your home, you don't want to go to the well to get the water. You want to get that at home. So more and more you want to be able to have access to that energy. People's behaviour shouldn't change, and what we say is, we'll do all that for you. You don't need to change your behaviour. We'll do all that remotely. You don't have to turn anything on or turn anything off or stop using energy. That's the really important thing. We want people to use electricity, but their behaviour doesn't necessarily change. I would say they're much more aware. They're more demanding of actually, I should be able to plug in my EV car. I should be able to, use an electric heating system. Like if you go to NIE and say I'm putting in electric heating throughout Causeway Coast and Glens, there would be a very large shark intake of breath saying no way, there's no way that the grid would be able to support that. And what we're saying is actually if you optimise every piece of energy that's coming into your house through renewables, that won't be a problem. In fact, we can assist you with that, and we are presently supporting the energy back onto the grid in the Coleraine area.
I'm seeing a world where I now need a photovoltaic field out the front so I can power my electric vehicle. I just think my own experience of it certainly has been interesting, because when you're very aware of how much power you have and how far it's going to take you, decisions around will I put the fan on or will I turn the heating on change because I'm thinking, do I have enough to get home? But that's just an aside on me and my electric vehicle, and will not detract the panel from anything more on my adventures with electric cars. So we obviously have a growing landscape of tech companies in this space. Cara, do Northern Ireland businesses have access to investment to grow at speed?
I would say yes. The VC community is really growing, and actually climate tech is now something that lots of people want to invest in, and I'm really positive about that. And I suppose when I look at investment committees across banks and actually any type of lending or funding at the moment, this is a huge area of interest, and it's really exciting place to be. And I see kind of Terry, I'm sure, having been through the process. So I would be really encouraging of people to kind of open and look at that. And actually it can really be revolutionary to kind of how you can then grow and go internationally. But Terry, I'm sure from your own perspectives you can add to that.
Absolutely, yeah. Certainly our VCs, we have a local VC who were the first. They were our initial investors, and that was a brilliant start. And I think they're supported by Invest NI, so it is there is government intervention there. But that allowed us to get our first start, and from that, then we were able to raise money from the US, from France. In our latest round, and our latest round of investors are they're kind of a little bit of a mixture between people that are in the sector, but some institutional venture capital. And what we're seeing from particularly this venture in Paris is they now have an ESG mandate, so they track and they're concerned, and they very much score us on how much we're giving back to the climate as well. We're also seeing impact investors, and impact investors are very interesting because they're not just concerned about making any money. They're really just concerned about making an impact. So people like Astor Ventures down in, I think they're a US company who have opened offices in Dublin. So we're seeing them, and they all need a climate a climate approach, a climate story. So there's definitely a lot of support there for companies that do have a green agenda, and even if it's not their number one priority or their number one selling point, certainly to have some aspect of green technology or climate positivity is very important to those companies.
Okay, that's great. Going to come to you, Stephen. I don't know if you have any views on the VC world, but we have tech companies here developing new leading-edge solutions. But how do we get businesses, government, and consumers to buy? It's been a bit slow, I think, getting people connected in on it. So what needs to change to get people behind this?
There's an education piece, and it's always easy to say education. What do you mean by that? But I do think there's an incentive piece. You know, we've sort of more got legislation coming from GB in the sense of things like the end of fossil fuel cars and etc. And I don't think we've got an energy strategy now, but what we really don't have is actions that are driving change. And I think we need to see that. I mean, one of the conversations I've had with the Department for Economy is there actually isn't a body to deliver the incentive schemes. So there is talk of a one-stop shop, and I think when that comes, it'll be long overdue. I think I was campaigning for it back when I was a politician. So, you know, it's great to see it in black and white, but it'll be even better to see it in bricks and mortar or whatever way they choose to deliver it. So I think having that one-stop shop where, you know, I know again as an MLA, when people would come to me and they'd say, we're back to the issue of retrofit. I want to retrofit my home. I'd have to go, well, are you housing executive? Are you private? Are you private rental? What's your income bracket? And there's a whole suite of schemes. Do you fit into any of them? Very often the answer was no. Going to one place with experts in that and having schemes that fit the customer, as opposed to the customer having to fit the schemes, I think is definitely the way forward. So we need that, and you know, that's across the range, because if we're talking actually what are all the things we want people to do, well, we want them to insulate their homes, we want them to move to EVs, we want them to move to heat pumps, and we want them to use the smart technology that, you know, because from our point of view, you can keep putting on more renewables, but actually if you don't have management of the demand side, a lot of the time you're turning the generators off, so that's not good for us, and it's not good to be effectively wasting energy. So that's a lot of change for people in their homes, having a one-stop shop with experts, but also you need the suite of policy to support that transition. So I think there's a lot to do. The one-stop shop's the right model, but we now need to see something concrete about what that will look like.
And I think that just to add to that, I think one of the things as well is for government to be really encouraging and incentivise technology that makes that difference. I mean, I purchased a Tesla just a year ago, and to me, that's been a fantastic experience. The price of the technology had dropped, which was my driver, and that has come about through innovation and through better batteries and longer ranges on the car. So I think that's been really important. So the technology has very much driven the uptake of EVs around the world, and of course fuel costs as well. Now people are purchasing EVs because it's just so the differential between fossil fuels versus the EVs has got so large as well. But for me, I think for government to be focusing on supporting technology that can help the climate, I think is really important as well.
And I'll just say that the retrofit is definitely a challenge for us. We fitted 60 batteries and PV in Coleraine, and we were giving them away. So this was an incentive that we started with Innovate UK. And you have no idea how difficult that was, because people just don't trust it. It's like, what is the catch? What's it going to mean for me? And it wasn't until we had 2 community centres who said, yes, we'll take it. And we fit it in the community centres, and people actually saw it and saw it working. before they were actually convinced. So that education piece and the retrofit piece is difficult. It's not an easy move. And back to the education piece, but people need to see it to believe it. And the other thing I would say is, absolutely, I agree so much with Stephen. We need to have some push from policy to encourage house builders to say, actually, you shouldn't be building any new homes without some form of renewable, some form of storage, some form that you can use smart technology to make your home more efficient, to allow you to have all the good things we talked about, like heat pumps, like electrification, like somewhere for your car charger. And if we don't do that and it's not pushed, then we won't get the backing from it. So we really need to push that. And I think DFE particularly have a role to play here. And I won't go into the politics of it all, but people will very happily join in if they think there's a policy for it or there's an incentive for it. And I'm not talking about just getting it free, because I say even giving it free is not an easy move. People need to be convinced. So I think there's a larger infrastructure piece that needs to happen in Northern Ireland, and we've got all the right bits in place. We've got all the right renewables. We've got a lot of the wind, as Stephen talked about, but we're not using it to its best.
Yeah, it's that bit about step change, isn't it? It's almost like you need disincentives to use the old stuff as well as incentives to use the new stuff. Cara, what about from a business perspective? How are you seeing clients adopting or changing their behaviours in relation to net zero?
I think it goes back to your point at the start, Lynn. There is a piece here about we're seeing inflation and the costs of energy in small business, which is really difficult at the moment. And I know of businesses the largest kind of cost line after people at the moment is their energy, and actually focusing on that. So just actually to build on what you just said about the disincentives, I think there is a real impetus at the moment to look at actually everything a business is doing. But also, as we all know, there are kind of climate and lots of things coming in the accounting world about how you're going to have to report. And I suppose the one thing I would say is, there is something here about larger companies are being asked to do this first, and there will be reporting right down into the supply chain that I'm not yet convinced that everybody really understands what's going to come at them in terms of letters to ask them to kind of report up the value chain. But I think that really will, if people see that in a positive way, it'll probably be quite a lot of admin and paperwork, and it'll feel like that. But actually that maybe does sort of take us forward in terms of how people really think about how they can make their own impact to net zero in each of the companies. But I know that's easy for me to say, and actually when you're getting all that come at you alongside everything else that a small business needs to think about, it's hard. But a lot there, and we hope it will be positive.
Yeah, and I'm just smiling, Terry, about the fact that you have a Tesla. When I was coming up from Dublin and stopped at the Apple Green, there were something like 10 Tesla chargers and one that would work for my car that wasn't working. So that on that day, I was going, I wish I bought a Tesla. But anyway, moving on. I suppose it's a neat segue to key actions. So, what key actions are needed to really accelerate our journey to net zero? And you'll all have a point of view on this. So I'm happy to take everybody's views, and then we might open this up to some questions from the floor. So what needs to change? What do we need to do?
I think from my perspective, what I would like to see is more support for technology companies. I'd like to see better R&D tax credits, more accessible R&D tax credits. I guess selfishly, we'd like to see incentives for farmers to use our technology. We'd like to see that. But as I say, that's a triple win for the climate, for the farmers, and for the animals. So yeah, that would be the two things I'd like to see focus on.
I think I alluded to it at the start, and I'll come back to it. We need to fix the planning system, and we had a conversation. We talk about streamlining planning for green infrastructure projects, and we've seen with Repower EU, they're talking about improving consenting, making it is kind of public interest projects. We need, and the UK government have talked about that similar approach, but we need something similar in Northern Ireland. But actually, when I asked my members what would a streamlined planning system look like, what do we mean? If somebody asked me, what is it exactly you want, Stephen? Actually, if we could just start with meeting the existing planning timelines, and I'll give you an example. Statutory consultee is supposed to respond to a planning application within 3 weeks. Typically, for NIEA to respond to a wind farm application takes 12 months. So the target's 3 weeks, implementation is 12 months. that has to change. And that's about resourcing the system. There's one person in NIEA who looks at every wind application. So change that 1 to 3, and all of a sudden we start seeing projects move through more quickly. Again, as I said at the start, if we're serious that we're in a climate emergency, and I very much believe we are, we need to start acting like it's an emergency, respond with speed, treat green infrastructure projects as urgent, and deliver them through planning, because if we don't, the investment will go elsewhere, and indeed is going elsewhere. If we've effectively had a pause in solar development, for example, in Northern Ireland, whereas the Republic of Ireland is booming. So that's an opportunity lost. It's one we need to regain.
Yeah, just on the issue of wind farms, I know there's been quite a bit of talk about wind farms that generate electricity, but actually it can't be stored. So there's actually more being created than we can use. Like, what are your views on that? Because there's obviously a storage issue that sits alongside this too, which relates to infrastructure. And
yeah, and we're starting to build out battery storage. What we have at the minute, though, is more kind of fast response storage. What we need is longer duration storage. And at the minute, the investment's there, the technology's there, but there's not quite a market yet for it. So we do need to look at our markets about how do we incentivise that investment. So as I say, I think there's people waiting to invest. They're just waiting on the markets coming. Because what happens currently, it can be anything up to 10 to 15% in Northern Ireland. At times when the wind is blowing and we could be generating renewables, we're actually turning wind farms off, and instead we're using fossil fuels. For so many reasons that's wrong. It's more expensive, it's more damaging to the climate, and it undermines the business case for renewables. So for all those reasons, we do need to incentivise storage, better grid build out as well, and as we're developing more renewables, we need to be developing the grid and indeed the demand side response alongside that, because at the minute we always match generation to demand, but we can be matching demand to generation as well. So as we all know, the wind still blows at night when we all turn the lights off, but you could be charging your electric car, for example, things like that. But we should be incentivising people to do that through dynamic pricing. So if the demand's low but the supply is high, the price should be coming down, and you should be able to plug in knowing you're getting cheaper electricity. We don't have smart systems yet that work like that.
And I think 2 points on the storage. I think more recently in the last year, we're seeing more companies, small engineering companies, agricultural companies saying, we've got a wind farm, can you help us store it? And we're looking at that more and more, so that the larger batteries are really, really going to be very important to us. And I think the other thing we need to do is educate Northern Ireland electricity networks in that storage is not a generator. And what they do is, if you apply to put a large storage battery beside your wind farm, if you're a farmer, they'll say, oh no, that's double the generation, and therefore we won't let you do that. Instead of saying, actually, you're storing it for a different time and you're helping our network. So there's a big piece of education that needs to be working there, and that's utility regulator, DFE, NIE networks all need to look at that. So it's that education piece around the generation, and storage is different. And absolutely, to Stephen's point, so many of the wind gets curtailed or constrained for all of those reasons, and that we can't use it. And a lot of the time, the price goes down to zero or minus when we could be using that. And again, education of our own infrastructure. And I think that's, for me, to answer your question, that's an absolutely big point. We need the infrastructure and the companies that we've got, and the DFE, NIE, regulator, all to work together to come up with a solution and not to work in silos. It would be great if we saw them all working together.
Yeah, and I think collaboration probably is critical to that. Anne-Marie, Cara, anything else to add?
I certainly was going to say storage, but I'll change it now to, I think for me it's prioritisation. Actually, we're not going to be able to be brilliant at absolutely everything, but I do think in this small part of the world there are some things we could do brilliantly, and I'm really proud of the work already done by the universities and some companies around hydrogen and the agriculture piece that we could really grow in and be really famous for. So I think, there could be just that encouragement to prioritise, because I think sometimes you sort of see 100 things, and actually what are those things we're going to do really well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because often you can try to boil the ocean, and actually the amount of different interventions that can be made confuse people even more. So if you can keep it really simple and focused, actually probably you could achieve a heck of a lot more. And I think it's a really neat way to kind of finish the panel debate. So I'm not sure if there are any questions from the floor. We've got a roving mic if anybody has anything they want to ask, because we have a group of people here who very much know what they're talking about in the area of climate change.
Just a point on your wind farms. Is there anything being done to make them less of an eyesore?
I mean, this very much comes down to a matter of opinion. I don't see them as an eyesore at all, but I suppose I often get asked, about identification of sites, and I know our members do spend a lot of time trying to find the kind of site where they're most likely to get through planning from their perspective, but I suppose from the community perspective where they're seen as being less intrusive. But the reality is the higher you go, the more wind there is, and typically we cite wind farms on hills. I remember being shown two maps. One was of the strongest wind areas, and one was of the most sensitive landscapes, and they were effectively the same map. So that's always the challenge for wind farm developers. But I think as well we have to put it in perspective. On the one hand, we face a climate emergency that threatens how we live as a species, versus some people don't like the look of them. I just think we have to look at what the priorities are, and I think we have to accept that wind is part of our future energy system, and whilst absolutely we should work between developer and community, and indeed I think government could and should play more of a role in that conversation, to identify the right sites, but the reality is onshore wind will be the bulk of our electricity generation for the next decades.
Speaking on the energy and crisis, do you think that that's going to push drive for the climate to be sped up, the deadline for 2050?
So accelerating it to before 2050?
I mean, it certainly does. We've sort of seen in energy prices, and indeed the crisis with Ukraine. I mean, I used to talk about energy security, and it felt like an abstract conversation. And then the invasion of Ukraine happened, and energy security became kind of top of the political agenda. And indeed, I think the UK energy minister now described energy being an essential part of national security. So I think it has elevated that conversation. As I mentioned, the EU level, they're talking about how do we improve consent rates or consent times. The UK government's talking about that. I think we've a bit to go to have that conversation here. But I think the number of drivers towards the energy transition are increasing. And I think there is almost a realisation now we should have started sooner, but given we are where we are, we now really do need to get on with it as fast as possible.
I was just wondering, where are and what roles do the local councils have to play in energy strategy? My understanding is that over in GB, planning and building regulations require, in new build houses, provision for car charging points and things like that. And it's not out of the question to mandate, a small solar array, things like that, as part of a new build development, because I think if people start to see these things and they become more normalised, then people will accept them more. And also, it's my understanding that the Office of Low Emissions over in GB have a pot of money that only the local councils here can access. The DFI aren't able to access that, and my understanding is no council in Northern Ireland has availed of that pot of money. So I could be wrong there, but that's my understanding and a brief interaction with the DFI there. But where are they here?
I can speak to Causeway Coast to Glens Council, who work very closely with us in what's called the Girona project, and they very much backed that and helped fund some of that because they were very keen to address some of the fuel poverty and also to reduce the emissions because it's a big agricultural part of the world. They depend on tourism a lot, and so they did support us hugely in that. I think you're right in that we don't get access to all the funding that comes from Westminster. A lot of the levelling up fund and stuff should come via your local councils, and a lot of that should come there. But it tends to be, and I'm sure Carol can talk about this. It tends to be private companies that try and apply for that, and I'm not sure how successful we are. We applied for an Innovate UK grant, which we won 1 of 10. And the only one in Northern Ireland to get anything from that, what was called Prospering from the Energy Revolution, driven by BES in Westminster. Not hugely supported in Northern Ireland, I have to say, and we tend to be a bit of an outlier, but there are funds available, especially with the Levelling Up Fund, and it's very much about councils trying to support that, the growth deals particularly, and again I'll say that, Belfast growth deal, the Causeway Coast and Glens Council have put in for a growth deal with 14 projects. None of them are energy related. And again, that would be a huge disappointment for us, because I think that's where the priority should be. So I think your challenge is absolutely valid. I can't speak about what other fundings come from, but I know the Levelling Up Fund is one that can be availed.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne-Marie. And thank you to everybody on the panel for your time today, to Terry, to Stephen and to Cara, and to the audience as well, and for your engagement at the end with the questions. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.